Hey everyone, Heero here, and today we're gonna look at Seed. The pilot who proves Seed Senior isn't just for show by providing amazing supportive buffs to herself and other attack agents that enable big BP damage. I'll be discussing her kit, builds, engines, and possible teams. Just as a quick disclaimer though, the footage and information that will be shown is from the Creator Experience server, so things can still change when her banner drops. Let's start by discussing her core passive, since it's her main selling point. First of all, she designates another attack agent in the party with the highest base attack as her Vanguard. And her Vanguard plays an important role for her Besiege, Onslaught, and Direct Strike buffs. Now, whenever Seed uses an EX special, she gives her Vanguard the Onslaught buff indicated by the icon on screen. And whenever her Vanguard uses their EX special, they give Seed the Direct Strike buff. Now, both of these buffs have the same effect of giving 1000 attack with a bonus 30% crit damage. And when Seed's Direct Strike buff and her Vanguard's Onslaught buff are both active at the same time, both Seed and her Vanguard will gain the Besiege buff, which just gives a pretty nice 25% damage boost to both of them. Now, the buffs provided by Seed are similar to the offensive buffs given by Astriao, Caesar, or Yuzuha, letting you run her as both a DPS and as a support at the same time. Granted, of course, she doesn't have the same quality of life utility like Astriao's quick swaps or Caesar's shields, but she makes up for it with her high damage instead. But overall, these buffs makes duo attacker comps more viable to run in endgame content. Just note, Direct Assault and Onslaught only last for 40 seconds, and if even one of them expires, both characters will lose the Besiege buff. But both buffs have a refreshable duration, so they will pretty much have permanent uptime as long as you use EX specials with both characters. It's also worth noting that these buffs only take effect for the active character, and whenever the character with the buff switches out, it stays on them for 3 seconds or until they leave the field before being deactivated. This pretty much ensures that even if you quick swap during a skill, the ability of the character you left attacking is still buffed by Seed. But moving on, upon entering battle, Seed gains Onslaught while her Vanguard gains Direct Assault, instantly activating Besiege. And finally, for every point of energy the Vanguard or Seed consumes, Seed gains 0.5 points of Steel Charge, which are needed for some of her attacks. Steel Charge is Seed's unique resource, indicated by the bar under her HP, which has a max of 150 Steel Charge points. And it's gained through using her ult, attacking with Seed, and having her or her Vanguard consume energy. And it's required to launch one of her most damaging abilities. However, before we can talk about that, we first have to look at her basic attack, Falling Petal Slaughter, a special punch triggered by holding or tapping attack after the following: her basic attack 4, dodge counter, quick assist, assist follow-up, or after her EX special consumes 60 energy. Just note, however, this special punch cannot build Steel Charge. But once you built up to 120 Steel Charge, it gives you one chance to use this attack immediately without comboing from any of the abilities I just mentioned. However, also at 120 Steel Charge, her bar glows orange and enables you to combo her punch into her basic attack Falling Petals Downfall just by pressing attack. Just note, this 2-point attack consumes 120 Steel Charge to use and activate, and it can only be used after using her ult or basic attack Falling Petals Downfall, also known as her punch. Now, it's worth noting that this combo is her most damaging attack, having the second highest multiplier in her kit next to her ult. So as much as possible, you want to use it as often as you can, and the neat thing is, the attack is also easily quick swappable. But speaking of her ult, aside from looking really damn cool, it's just your fairly standard high damage attack. However, it does give her 60 Steel Charge while also comboing directly into her punch attack. As for her EX special, you need to hold the button to activate it, which enables Seed to continually consume energy to hover, while barraging enemies with missiles, channeling her inner Heavy Arms Gundam. This continues until Seed consumes 60 energy, or you let go of the EX special button, which has her do a finisher. But as much as possible, you want to keep the barrage going until they expend 60 energy, so she can combo directly into her charge punch for more damage. As for her additional ability, it's only activated by attack agents, which makes sense after looking at her kit. First of all, it buffs Seed's ult, her punch, and slam attacks damage by 30%, while letting it ignore 25% electric res. And second, it regens 2 energy per second for her Vanguard as long as Seed is dealing damage. Which of course enables her secondary DPS to use their EX specials more often, either to maintain uptime for their shared buff or build Steel Charge for Seed. Now, it's also worth noting that her dodge counter has an extremely high multiplier, generates a ton of Steel Charge, and combos directly into her punch. So make sure to use it whenever you get the chance, since it allows for a short but high damage combo. Especially when compared to her basic attack sequence, which also deals quite a bit of damage, but is significantly longer. But with her kit out of the way, let's talk about her Mindscapes. Her M1 lowers the Steel Charge consumption to 100 for her basic attack Falling Petals Downfall. Gives her 40 Steel Charge when entering combat, and an additional 20 Steel Charge after ulting, while also buffing the crit damage of her punch and slam attack by 30%. This of course makes it so you can use her punch and slam combo more often. While her M2 enables her Besiege buff to give a 20% def ignore, while extending the duration of her EX specials by allowing it to consume up to 120 energy. And for every 5 energy it consumes, it buffs the damage of the following punch and slam combo by 5%. Now this def ignore is applied to Seed and her Vanguard, improving her supportive capability, allowing for both DPSs to deal more damage, while also providing up to a 24% damage buff for the punch after her EX special. As for her M4, it provides a decent 20% ult damage buff for herself, while enabling her Besiege buff to now buff her decibel generation rate by 10%. Just note, like her M2, this buff is applied to both Seed and her Vanguard, allowing for both of them to get an extra ult in stages like Deadly Assault. And finally, her M6, it gives her a permanent 50% crit damage buff, and whenever you use her punch attack, it fires off 3 laser beams that deal 165% of her attack as damage. Which of course is just more Seed damage, pretty straightforward, but the laser attack does look pretty damn cool. And with her Mindscapes out of the way, let's talk about her possible Wenjins. Seed signature, Cordis Gemina, has a 24% crit rate main stat, while providing an additional 15% crit rate just by equipping it. But aside from this, it gives her a 12.5 electric damage buff every time she uses a basic or EX special to deal damage. This stacks up to 2 times, with each stack lasting for 40 seconds. And when both stacks are active, it also allows her basics and ult to ignore up to 20% of the enemy's defense. In total, this Wenjin gives her 39% crit rate, which she really needs to make her easier to build and take more advantage of all the offensive stats she can get, because her kit doesn't give her any bonus crit rate. But aside from this, it's overall just a really big damage upgrade for Seed with all the offensive buffs it gives. However, it's not a must, because as an attack agent, she has a lot of options. A pretty good, easily accessible 5-star option is the Brimstone, with it giving her up to a 50% attack buff at full stacks. And it's not too hard to maintain uptime on its effects due to Seed spamming basics most of the time. However, it does have some caveats, first of which is it doesn't give crit rate, and second, if you're running another attack buffer like Astro Yao, Seed ends up getting too much attack that it becomes diluted. Now for other 5-star options, any Wenjin that gives crit stats can work, with once giving larger crit rate bonuses being more valuable. But Heartstring Nocturne is the best alternative to her signature, simply because it gives a huge crit rate and crit damage buff at the same time, with Eclipse being a close second for the same reason, but it gives 5% less crit damage. Just note, these are only crit stat sticks, and Seed cannot fully activate their effects to get their full bonuses. Now moving on to the 4-star options, it's the usual 3. Your best free-to-play option is Marcato Desire, simply because it gives 20% crit rate with its main stat. But sadly, you'll most likely only get 9.6% attack from its effects, since triggering anomalies in her teams is pretty rare. But if you don't have it, Starlight Knight as usual is pretty good for a 44.2% attack buff. But sadly, it doesn't give crit rate, and said attack bonuses can become diluted if you run other attack buffers. And lastly, Cannon Rotor is also a pretty decent option for bonus crit rate and a bit of bonus attack. But its only downside is that it's paid and it takes a while to get copies of. But with possible Wenjins out of the way, let's talk about drive discs. The 4-piece set, her best set is the new Dawn's Bloom set, which buffs her basic attack damage by 35% by equipping its full 4-piece set. But whenever Seed uses an EX special or ult, It gives an additional 20% basic attack damage buff for 25 seconds with a refreshable duration. So in total, this set gives her a whopping 55% damage buff for her basic attacks, which of course is her main damage source. However, its cons are it doesn't buff her ult, EX special, and dodge counter, which also deals quite a bit of damage. And it's also new, coming out next version, so you can't really pre-farm for it. So with that being said, a good alternative or temporary option is Woodpecker for its 8% bonus crit rate and up to a 27% attack buff just by scoring crits with some of her abilities. And the neat thing is, this set does buff all of her abilities. However, sadly, if you decide to run an attack buffer, the attack bonus from this set does get very diluted. As for the 2-piece sets, her best set is Woodpecker for bonus crit rate, because like I said, she has an extreme lack and need of it. But sets like Thunder Metal, Astral Voice, Hormone Punk, and Branch and Blade Song can all work as great options if they have significantly better stats. But with their possible drive discs out of the way, let's talk about stats. For main stats, you want to attack for slot 6, Electric Penner attack for slot 5, and finally crit rate or damage for slot 4. Now for the slot 4 main stat, crit rate is preferred because she already gains 78% crit damage from her core passive and level up bonuses, while having no sources of crit rate outside of Wenjins and drive discs. So without a crit rate main stat, she becomes pretty hard to build, especially if you decide to use a non-crit rate Wenjin. So only run crit damage if you already have a good crit ratio without a crit rate main stat. As for the slot 5 main stat, as usual, electric damage bonus is a great general use option that you can just slap on her. However, pen ratio is also a great option since she can get quite a bit of damage percent already from her buffs, the Dawn Bloom set, and if you decide to run her with Astra Yao. However, if you plan to run her with a defense shred source like Nicole or Trigger with her signature, a pen ratio main stat becomes way less desirable since it ends up giving diminishing returns. And lastly, attack is an option if you can't get good pen or electric main stats. But like I said, she can already get a lot of attack from her kit and supports, so it's not too ideal. As for substats, you mainly want to focus on crit rate first, then crit damage, then attack percent, and finally flat penner attack. Fairly standard for non-anomaly DPSs. Now unlike other recent units, C doesn't have a hard stat requirement to get the full benefits of her kit, so instead, I'll give a stat goal recommendation you can go for. First of all, the priority is to try to get her as close to 100% crit rate as you can to properly take advantage of all the offensive stats she can get. So I recommend going for 80 to 100% crit rate in battle. Now you can get away with lower like 75%. However, I don't recommend going lower than that since it will lead to an inconsistent damage output. As for crit damage, she already has 78.8% from her kit alone, so try to aim for 125% to 150% in battle for her to deal good damage. Now obviously you can go for more, but only do so once you're satisfied with her crit rate. And lastly for attack, she already gets a ton of it in battle, especially if you run her with an attack support like Astra or Yuzuha. So I recommend only going for 2,500 to 3,000 out of battle attack, which you can easily reach with a slot 6 main stat and a few attack percent substat rolls. With her stats out of the way, let's talk about possible teammates. Now first of all, it's very important to pair her with another attack agent, not only to activate her additional ability, but also because her kit is centered around having 2 attack agents in the team, otherwise her kit just straight up doesn't work. But with that being said, she can be ran with almost any attack agent. She is best used in duo attack teams where she can fulfill many roles. You can use her as the main on-field carry either to focus on her own damage output or to make up for the downtimes of units like Harumasa or Zhu Yuen. She can be used in a more burst sub-DPS playstyle, switched in during certain attacks to deal damage with her punch or provide energy for DPSs like Evelyn or Soldier Zero Anbi who needs a bit of field time. And she can do all of this while simultaneously playing the role of a high damage support that you can use as an alternative to supports like Astra Yao, all because of how big her buffs are. But overall, her playstyle will ultimately depend on what you're comfortable with and the attack unit she is ran with. So I suggest testing things out to see what works for you and the comp you're running. As for the supports you're using with her, it will depend on the second attack agent you decide to run. But in general, Aster Yao for her insane buffs, and Trigger for off-field stuns and her signature's defense shred are the best option that you can slot in most of her teams. Aster Yao's quick swap mechanic and Trigger's off-field stunning, combined with both of their low field times, makes balancing field time between Seed and other attack units so much easier, which is especially the case if they are units who requires lots of field time. Now other supports or stunners like Lucy, Nicole, Yufufu, and even Yuzuha for her huge attack buff can be used as well. But like I said, it heavily depends on the second attack unit and they're not as versatile as Trigger and Aster Yao. But with that being said, you can run her with burst damage agents like Harumasa or Zhu Yuan, where she's played in a more on-field playstyle to make up for the damage lost during their longer downtimes, while also providing them with energy to use their skills more often. But for the third slot in these teams, for Harumasa, a stunner is the best due to his reliance on stuns, with Trigger being the best choice. As for Zhu Yuan, she needs a support unit for her additional ability, so you can use either Aster Yao or Nicole, but you'll end up sacrificing a lot of stuns, so keep that in mind. And Qingyi can work for both teams, but from testing, it was kinda difficult balancing field time between her and Seed. And in terms of deadly assault score, Harumasa or Zhu Yuan teams with Qingyi perform 14 to 15% worse on average, but it's probably just due to my skill issue. But overall, Seed with Zhu Yuan and Harumasa is a pretty strong pairing. I was able to achieve quick runs in Shield defense and good scores in deadly assault, with a mono-electric team with Harumasa and Trigger achieving one of the highest scores of 38k, while Zhu Yuan and Aster Yao got 37.5k. Now if you're wondering about Hugo, well, I only recommend using him with Seed if you're running Trigger or Yufufu as your stunner. This is because other stunners like Lycon, Qingyi, and Lighter end up competing too much with Seed for field time, which makes the team really clunky to play and results in less overall stuns for Hugo. It's clunky to the point that you might as well just run another stunner or support instead of Seed to save you the headache and have Hugo himself perform better. However, this issue doesn't really apply to Trigger and Yufufu. You can effectively on-field Seed and still have Trigger and Yufufu provide a lot of stuns for Hugo. And due to Seed providing energy for Hugo, he gets way more EX specials than he actually needs, so you can use the extra for helping stun enemies faster. And shockingly, the Trigger and Hugo combo was the best team comp I tried, being third in terms of score and deadly assault, with them easily getting 39k no problem even with my skill issue ridden ass. Now moving on, she also works pretty well with more on-field driven agents like Soldier 0 Anbi, Ellen, Evelyn, and Soldier 11, where she can be played as a sub-DPS focused on burst damage, or you can on-field her for a bit in Anbi or Evelyn teams. And doing so won't hurt their performance since Seed can help them build their resources by giving them energy to use their EX specials more often. But with that being said, balancing field time between Seed and these agents can be a bit difficult, especially with Ellen or Soldier 11. But of course, these are really good teammates, but it will take more skill to use them effectively with Seed. But for your fourth slot, again, Trigger and Aster Yao are the best options, especially for easier field time management. But other options like Lucy, Nicole, Yuzuha, an M1 Rina, or Yufufu can work as well. But if you're wondering if you can use Lycon for Ellen or Lighter for S11, Ellen, and Evelyn, well, adding them to these teams makes it significantly harder to play since they all end up competing for field time. So I personally don't recommend it, especially for beginner or skill issue ridden players like me, but I'm sure one of you can probably make it work. But out of all these units, Evelyn and Sanvi were able to consistently get the highest scores in Deadly Assault, with both of them achieving the highest scores out of all the teams I tested when paired with Astra, with Evelyn scoring 41k and Anvi almost 40k. Out of the two though, I personally prefer Evelyn much more since it was much easier to know when to swap or quick swap into Seed compared to Anvi, since you can quick swap during her chain attacks and during or after her EX specials. But again, this is probably due to my personal skill issue. I'm not too good at playing Sanbei. But if you don't have any of the units I just mentioned, she can also work well with Billy. You can run Billy and Seed alongside a support like Aster Yao, Caesar, or Trigger, or simply run them with Nicole for a completely free-to-play team. Billy overall performed really well with Seed, achieving 30k score runs rather easily with all the teams I tested. And all of his comps are really simple to play, you just on-field Seed and quick swap to Billy during her punches to use his EX specials or ult. Now surprisingly, she also works well with a Nekomata with a support battery build. As you know, the cat doesn't really deal too much damage even with a cracked DPS build, so it's much better to use her in a way that enables Seed's damage. And here's where the support build comes in. With an R5 Housekeeper, an energy regen 2-piece set, and Seed regening energy for her, it allows Nekomata to get so much EX specials that it allows her to battery Seed, enabling her to use her punch combo more often. And to top it all off, you can give her a supportive set like Protopunk, Swing Jazz, or Astral Voice when you use her with Astra Yao to enable Seed's damage further. Also, side note, this build also works for Billy, and make sure to use the new set for your supports since it gives an 80% damage buff just by using their EX specials. But going back, this combo works so well that it plays 6 in terms of deadly assault scores out of all the teams I tried, with it scoring a high 37.5k. Which is neat since it finally gives Nekomata a pretty good endgame team. Granted, you had to sacrifice essentially her whole kit for it. Now she should also work really well with Orphe since she is an off-field attacker that uses her EX specials while off-field to provide steal charge for Seed without taking away her field time, with her possibly being the best partner for an on-field main DPS Seed. However, because she's not out in the CE server, I'll refrain from talking too much about her since that pairing still needs a bit of actual testing. But now, here's a chart comparing the performance of every Seed team I tried in Deadly Assault. Keep in mind, every S-ranked agent is at M0 and every A-ranked agent is at M6. All of them had their signatures, except Nekomata, who was given the support build I mentioned earlier. This was tested with the unknown complex boss that has electric and ether weaknesses. But with that in mind, the scores you see here are due to many variables like my skill issue, so they are bound to change depending on your skill level, team builds, wenjins, and more. But it should still give a good idea on how each team compared to each other. Now that's about it, which just leaves one last question. Is she a must-pull? Well, as usual, it depends on your account. If you already have an electric DPS like Anvi or Harumasa, or good buffers like Astra Yao, Seed isn't really a must-pull. From my experience, as a main on-field DPS, Seed didn't really perform that much better than the best electric DPSs we have, with Anvi being able to achieve similar scores in Deadly Assault or fast runs in Shield Defense with her current best teams. Now we'll have to wait if Orphe changes the status quo for Seed, because in my opinion, all she's really lacking to be a really good main DPS is an attack agent who can give her both field time and steal charge points at the same time, which Orphe seems to be. And if you already have a lot of buffers to provide similar buffs like Astra or Yuzuha, she becomes less valuable since you can run them instead and they are not limited to attacker teams. In this case, it's much better to save or roll for characters you like or need. Remember, the rest of the 2.x characters are still coming. However, Seed is definitely a must-pull if you're needing a good buffer for attack teams or a good electric DPS. She is a unit that can fulfill a lot of roles, whether it's a main DPS, a sub-DPS, or even a support who can be paired with other supports or stunners to enable the performance of other attack agents. Which makes her a very versatile character that has a lot of current themes, with her essentially being able to be paired with most attack units currently in the game. And due to her good supportive capabilities, she'll be viable for a very long time, especially when we get more attack characters. Even if she gets massively power crept as a damage dealer, her role as an attack support will always be valuable because of her massive buffs always being of benefit to any attack agent, especially if you're missing top tier supports like Astra Yao. But at the end of the day though, if you like Seed, pull for her, and if you don't, well don't. Personally, I'm definitely gonna be pulling for her because I love mechs, if you couldn't already tell from the random mecha references I crammed into this video.
Oh my god, she's so goddamn cool!
But anyway, make sure to tell me what you think about her in the comments below, and don't forget to hit me with a like and a sub. Now, onto the showcases, and as usual, forgive my skill issue, I'm pretty terrible at this game due to my aging motor skills.